holding folks accountable. But the one thing, go on.
Oh, I can add, it's holding them accountable, but it's also explaining who does what. We spend billions of dollars explaining the presidency. We spend hundreds of dollars explaining why a school board member or a city council member is probably more dangerous to you. Because if you have a school board that thinks that it's okay to put police in your schools, but not books, then you've got a problem. And that's determined by your school board member. If you've got a city council member who blindly signs off on allocations of dollars that put more militarized police in your community, but not public safety in your community, we've got to connect the dots between the issues that matter and who's in charge of the solution. The president can do a lot, but the president is not the reason we face the challenges we face, by and large. I like to remind people, Stand Your Ground was created by the state of Florida, not the US government. The erosion of the social safety net was created by the governor of Wisconsin, not the president of the United States. The erosion of labor rights across this country happened in state legislatures, and Jim Crow never had a single federal law. So we cannot keep our eyes so fixed on that prize that we ignore all of the enemies we have around us.
That's so true. And let me just ask you this question, Stacey. It wasn't on my list of questions, so I'm just throwing this one at you. We see these young folks out in the street, Black Lives Matter, all over the place, and they are so enthused right now. This has been, and this is young Black folks, young white folks, middle-aged folks. I have never seen, I ain't that old, but I ain't seen this type of movement in our country in years. And my struggle is, and my question is, how do, from your point of view, do we turn this moment into a true movement where we are grabbing on to their coattails and helping them do what they need to do to lift up the movement that they're trying to start or have started?
So I juxtapose this with my participation in 1992 in the protest in response to Rodney King. We responded in part because of the visceral nature of seeing a tape for the first time, a nationalized beating of a Black man by police. For this generation, this is a daily occurrence. They see this all the time. And what is so remarkable is that rather than becoming anesthetized to it, they are demanding change. And that comes back to my point that we can't chastise them for being in the streets. We've got to say, be in the streets and be at the ballot boxes, and know that both are necessary. Too often we hear that it's a binary choice. You don't be a protester, be a voter. No, be both. Because protesting in a democracy is how we say allow our demands, but voting is how we make those demands real and hold those demands as being met. And if they don't do it, voting, as you know, is the peaceful overthrow of the government every 2 years and every 4 years. We have to take the responsibility to connect those dots, as opposed to chastising and finger wagging at them saying, well, you should be doing this. No, invite them in, engage them, and make certain that we do grab the coattails. Don't police their language. Make certain we engage their participation. And that's what we tried to do in my campaign. And we increased youth participation by 139%.
Awesome. Awesome. Knowing this is one thing. Overcoming it is another thing. So how do we, from your point of view, get over this hurdle? How do we protect the Black vote? How do we make sure our vote is counted and not canceled? You're doing some campaigns in some areas, but how do we make this not just in the areas where Stacey is, but we want to make this across the Black community totally? Give us the nuggets that we need.
So Fair Fight 2020 is operating in 18 states. And those are states that all have fairly substantial Black populations, including we're in the South, we're in Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. So we've covered the waterfront. We're not in Tennessee or Kentucky, but we are in Texas. And so part of it is that we're doing this work. Plus we're in Michigan, we're in Wisconsin. So I encourage people to go to Fair Fight 2020 to learn more about what we're doing and sign up to volunteer. But it's also important that we recognize and investigate the local communities. And one of the reasons I was excited about being on this show is that CBTU is connected to all of the labor efforts that are out there. And too often we separate out the movement from the mechanisms. You all are a mechanism for the movement to continue by offering the work that you do as part of the solution. But to solve voter suppression, we have to make certain people are registered and stay on the rolls. that they can cast a ballot and that that ballot can be counted. And those are things that we can help people do. There's a great website called vote.org that can give you more information no matter where you live about what your status is. But it's also about engaging labor, engaging fair fight, and also sometimes just encouraging the creation of independent groups that are doing this work and just arming them with the information they need. But the other piece is that if we win this time, if we win the White House and we win the Senate, and we do not ignore down ballot races, we vote on those state races, we can actually fix these problems by restoring the Voting Rights Act, by adopting fundamental changes to our democracy, and by making it nearly impossible for whomever the next enemy is to take our rights away.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. Stacey, I know you have a tight schedule today, and I thank you for spending the time that you have with us today. I want to give you an opportunity. Now, if you want to give us a heads up on any conversation you had with, like, you know, a guy running for president or something like that, if you want to like throw those nuggets out there for us, if you want to give the CBTU group a heads up on this, we wouldn't mind. But whatever last nuggets you want to leave with us would be great at this time, Stacey.
That was very deftly done. But I will say this, I'm excited about Vice President Joe Biden. If you're watching the policies he's rolling out, and if you're watching the way he's approaching these conversations, he is speaking to this moment, but he's also anticipating the next decade of challenge, using COVID recovery as an opportunity to create the America we deserve. But he can't do it alone, and he shouldn't. Our responsibility is, if we can't get excited about him, get excited about the power to shape the future. There's a young man named Yellow Payne who wrote, he did this amazing rap. You can find it on YouTube. And it's kind of a modern day version of Schoolhouse Rock, where he explains both the despondency we often see among young Black people, but it also tells them, here's the power you have. We've got to internalize that and speak it into truth. I had the extraordinary privilege of being taught by Joseph Lowery, C.T. Vivian, and John Lewis. That is a grace that I will always carry with me. And I just encourage everyone to remember that they started young, they fought hard, and they got us to where we are. And it's our responsibility to take the next mile.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for taking out your time out of your busy schedule and spending some time with some little old folks like us at CBTU, sharing your wisdom with us. And we look forward to supporting you in whatever endeavors you are working on. CBTU is with you 100%. We were with you when you were running for governor, and you should be the governor right now, according to the real vote count. And we will be with you at the programs that you started, that you're heading up right now, and we'll be with you tomorrow too. So thank you, and God bless you.
God bless you as well. Thank you so much, President Melvin.
Thank you. Oh, wow, that was a great conversation. Her schedule was tight, and she took out the time to be here with us. Now I want to turn to two other powerful Black women who are having an impact on the 2020 elections. We have with us Reverend Dr. Regina Thomas from the American Federation of Teachers Union. She's the bridge between AFT and the community, the outspoken voice at the table demanding justice, and an enforcer of human rights in all areas she is in. I think the first time I met Regina, she was running a program for the Obama campaign. And I got on the phone and I'm like, who is this country woman they got talking on this phone? Who does she know about politics? This woman has a political mind second to no one in this country. With her today is my homegirl, Senator Carla May. This sister is unfiltered, unrestrained, and unstoppable. She is a force to be reckoned with in both the political and labor arena, because she's a proud member of CWA as well. I want to thank these ladies for being here tonight with me. It is truly a privilege to be with such esteemed sisters. I want to start with an icebreaker, if you will. My soft question for the two of you, I asked it pretty much everyone because I feel it's important. we hear this answer from so many different perspectives. Why is the 2020 election so important? We'll start with Reverend Dr. Thomas.
Well, one, thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I want to shout out to CBTU. It is important. One, today I watched a speech by Secretary of Treasury Loretta Johnson upon her retiring from AFT. And she began to sort of lay out the relationships that she had throughout her 50 plus years of serving in the union. It is important to vote because I stand on her shoulders, and we all stand on the shoulders of John Lewis or Dr. King. And my grandfather used to say something, if it's worth them fighting to keep you from it, it is something you ought to run to.
Awesome.
And so if there are folk around this country, be it governors, the president of the United States of America, that is going out of their way to block our participation, that is something that is worth running to. If it's so important that they don't want us to do it, we must find what it is in it. This year is census. And so the redistribution of the economics of this country is all about sort of the census count. It's the redistribution of sort of the congressional leadership in this country. And so if we care about the laws that would prevent police from continuing to put their shoulders, knees on our shoulders, then we must fight and vote. I can stay on here a long time and shout out the various reasons that we ought to vote, but I know my sister Carla is in the legislature, so she got some issues also. So I'm gonna punt to her right now.
Carla?
Well, I just think that we're in the middle of a revolution, and we have such an opportunity right now to change the paradigm for many communities. When you're talking about, especially communities of color. And I want to thank you for having this conversation, having it live, because I think more conversations like this, putting it in a virtual spectrum where people can actually engage and get involved is awesome. So I want to thank CBTU for doing that, and especially inviting me to have an opportunity to be on this platform. But let me just, go down the line, being in the legislature, you see so many laws that are still on the books. And what I call them is discriminatory public policy that's still in practice today. And let me just talk about some of those policies. This is an opportunity for people in this revolutionary movement to take advantage of. This is something similar to the civil rights movement. It's just a different flavor. And you see this uprising all over the country. And I believe that people should engage and take power, because power is not going to be given to you. And we can take this power by at least voting and increasing the number of votes so we can change who is leadership and who's creating these public policies. Because if you look at the state of Missouri, and what we're 12% of the population, or approximately almost 14% of the population here, you don't have the presence of African Americans in leadership. And so that means that people who are occupying the top position in the state, you don't have African American leadership. So therefore, in all the state departments that are responsible to the people downstream, the presence is biased, the policy is biased. Just like we just opened up medical marijuana, they put it on the ballot, but you have less than 0.5% of any participation or any minorities chosen for those contracts or distribution. So it's important for people to understand why it's important for us to get on this revolutionary train. And if you haven't voted, get on the train by casting your vote, then let's stay on the train and keep it moving by changing this public policy. And and another public policy is a lot of states, let's say here we got a $1.2 billion contract, that you're giving to like the corrections department, to one entity. And then you look at African American participation in that contract, it's none. no African American participation in the contract. So that's $1.2 billion that somebody is making, but you don't have any African American participation. And when you do want African American participation, we do it in a sharecropping fashion. We give the big contract to the large white companies, and then they break off pieces of it and sharecrop it to white people. So what I'm trying to say here, if we want to really, if Black Lives Matter, we have to start with the economics of it. And we have to change the economics of it and get Black people involved in the economics and the allocation of resources in the state. That's what we have to do. So, you know, that's why it's essential for us to begin this voting. Get on the train and vote.
Thank you. Thank you so much. May I just say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And can I just say that?
Yeah,
Ruth
just say it.
Bader
Just say it. Just say
Ginsburg.
it.
Just stop right there. I mean, we're at a 5-4 Supreme Court right now. And we don't talk about this. Ruth ain't doing all that great. I mean, she done beat all the odds. She done beat cancer I don't know how many times, and she done fell down, and she done got sick. And look, I pray for Ruth every day. Because Ruth, if anything happens, if the good Lord called Ruth home, we are easily, the issue that Mitch said last time, that it was too close in February before the election to put in another Supreme Court. Don't buy that if something happened to Ruth, that they would not immediately within a week have somebody else in that seat and turn that from a 5-4 to a 6-3 court. We can't have that. Just say federal courts. We think we getting a bad rap now with them conservatives that they putting on the court right now. You don't want to see nobody look like us going to court for nothing. They putting people on the bench that ain't never been in a courtroom before, but they gonna go sit behind the bench and rule on somebody else. We got reason to get out there. This is why I asked the question. The themes are the same, but each person is different. I asked the question because it leads me right to what I think is the heart of the issue. Everybody knows what's at stake. But how do we get people to care? How do we make this election more? As one person said on this show, unenthusiastically voting for Biden. How do we change that? As I asked Stacey earlier in the show, how do we change that from your point of view? We'll start with Clayola on that one.
So, you know, what I'm doing is, you know, thankfully we had a meeting of the executive board of CBTU, and we, you know, thought about ways that we can get people engaged, you know, and one of those, and we came up with, you know, ideas and topics and information. So it's about executing. We have to go get them. So what I've done is I've been on the ground all of this primary election, basically. And what we've done is built a coalition of people where we're going out into those areas where the vote is low, and we've been caught up in knocking on doors, going and get them. The people that's standing on the corner, we're going with them with information. Not only are we having information, we got the census information. We have the application for absentee ballot. You know, we letting them information about notarizing those ballots. That's the type of information we're passing out. And you have to do that block by block. It's a tedious process, but that's what we do. I'm on the ground. That's how I was raised up in politics, to go block by block, door by door. And that's what we have to do. We have to go get them and bring them into the process, you know. And I was listening to your conversation with Stacey Abrams, and she was talking about when you encounter these young people that say, I don't vote, nothing's going to change. So you do have to recognize, you know, that feeling that they have about nothing's going to change. You don't, what you do is you tell them what's the possibility right now in this moment, and say, can you take advantage of what's getting ready to happen in this moment? You know, right now we're in the middle of this revolution, and we need people in place that's going to make a difference in criminal justice reform. We need people in place that's going to put expungement on the laws, you know, for people who was locked up at 17 and got 30 years. We need people in place to change the paradigm. When we're talking about the allocation of resources and stuff, you have communities where the majority is being ruled by the minority, especially in African-American communities. I live in one. So what I'm trying to say is that's how you get them engaged. You got to give them a right now thing and say, I just need you to go with me right now and then ask them to help me knock on these doors. And they've been doing it. I have young African-American men who people would say are not normally the ones that would knock on doors. They call me, Miss Carla, when we going out? You ready for us to go out? So we have to engage them that way, make them a part of the process, because that's what CBTU did for me. When I was young, 16 in high school, they took me and brought me into that process. And so I think that's what we have to do to other youth, and that's what I'm doing.
Thank you so much. And as I said earlier in the show, Regina has been playing politics at many levels. She served as Secretary of State for New Jersey for a period of time. She has been playing politics and playing in politics and giving political advice to many for years. At this moment in time, Regina, how do we get them to care? How do we do this? I mean, you've been through these struggles before in political games and political elections. How do we get the folks to care?
I was talking to some young people on yesterday in Montgomery, Alabama. It's part of Doris Crenshaw brings together some youth, and I read to them the first chapter of Joshua, when Moses had died, and God spoke to Joshua and said, "Don't be afraid, be courageous." I think what we have to do is don't change the course. He didn't tell him to go in a different direction because you're younger. I think you got to go in the same course, but because Joshua was going to do it a little different, we must listen to that. I think Sister Carla had a point. It's we have to do what we used to do when we didn't have technology. It must be messenger versus message. You can't give me no news on my social media because I don't pay no attention to it, because I believe that social media is so influenced by false narratives. You got to pick up the phone and call me or text me. That way I know you have a relationship with me because you got my personal information. But just out here sending me something out in space is not helping me. So I think we have to go back to our messengers and begin to allow them to reach one, teach one. And then each one of them reach one, teach one. I know it's the old arithmetic. We're not looking, Googling nothing, but I think we have to go back to sort of the basic fundamentals so that everybody will understand it at the way they can receive this information. What's relevant for me at 63 years old, a union member, which means as an African-American female, I'm making more money per hour than my African-American female counterparts. I am in a different place than the average African-American sister that's out on the streets. But I must go to her and sensitize that, sis, I got to bring you with me. So look here, we got some things that we can do together to make this happen. We can't force this. We're too busy. And I think Stacey said it to you, Melvin. We got to tell the truth. We got to tell the whole truth about this voting thing. This ain't no miracle, but you can't, as a former basketball player, I couldn't score points if I wasn't in the game. So I would be on the sidelines when the coach take me out. Coach, coach, put me in, because I could see how I could move and maneuver in a place sitting on the bench. We need to now let everybody play in the game. Black, white, Asian Americans, LGBTQ, labor. We need to now open up this umbrella. It is too closed. We believe that this politics is an old boys network. Open this thing up. And when you do that, young people begin to see them in it. You know what I'm saying? They begin to see them. You know, they don't see themselves now because guess what? They sitting on the same corner, jobless as they were 8 years ago. It does not, 12 years ago, they were sitting on that same corner. Their basketball courts don't have no nets, grass growing up in the middle of the cracks. The bus system is bad, so public transportation, there are food deserts. They need to see a change by virtue that they are part of the change. So, you know, and until you see yourself in the narrative does not exist.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I see just what you're saying. CBTU is trying to work every angle to increase voter enthusiasm. So it's good to hear different strategies. Preach, Reverend, preach. So you got to take the word to them sometime. I hear you, Sister Regina. You got to go back to what we stood on for years. The one thing that's brought Black folks through for years has been our faith. And definitely we got to go back to our faith if we're going to make it from where we are now to where God wants us to be and where we ought to be as a people. As Stacey brought up early on the show, they see the demographics shifting just like we see the demographics shifting. And the difference is they're taking a hold of it. It's going to be less of them. They want to keep power. Even though we're going to be in the majority, they want to keep power. So they're trying to figure out now how when we have more of us in 15, 20 years, that they still in power. We've got to take that narrative and shift that around.
Yes.
And we got to stay in our lane, because I think there are so many organizations. I think we're competing against that too. Everybody is in Carla's neighborhood, African American neighborhood. Everybody trying to do voter registration. Well, no, sometimes you got to do the vote. CBTU got to do the voter registration. Somebody else got to do the social media, whatever. The other folk got to do the GOTV. Some folk got to go and hang out with the pastors and say, hold on. These are some things that you can do that's not in violation of your 501c3 status. Some folk got to sit down in the barbershops and tell the Black men that it is very important that they join us sisters in making sure that families stay together, that everyone is fed, that folk get jobs. We all must do this together. And so we got to find a space. And I think CB2U does an excellent job of that. Everybody has to find a space, and we have to run our lane, stay in our lane. It's more, once we win, the pie is bigger. So we ain't got to fight for that same slice. We win this, it'll be 8 slices in that one pie.
That's right. And what we have to do is that unity is very important. That's right. And letting people, it's like running a whole campaign. You know, somebody do the signs. You get me? Somebody is doing the phone banking. You know, it's just splitting up, you know, the duties so that we can all win together. And that's why we got to continue that economic narrative. People want change. And you talked about, you know, the people are sitting on the corner and they don't see the change. The grass is still growing up. They don't have jobs and stuff. So when we go out and we're having this conversation with them, we say, yes, we understand, but this is because we can't get enough people to vote to change the narrative. I need to change this person who is now in this office, who is controlling the allocation of resources and who are controlling the jobs. If you got one person in the office and they can employ, you know, over 100,000 people, then we need to change that person in the job so that we can diversify, you know, the plan. And so that's how you bring it home to them. And so you got to go out there and have them conversations with them, and they'll have them conversations. They'll register to vote on the spot, and then they'll give you your information. And then on election day, you got to go get them.
And let me just point out another thing is, and I think going back to what Regina said in her comments, we don't all have to do the same thing. We don't all have to be in the same space either. There's more Black folks than all of our organizations can touch. And what we need to do is not look at trying to get some glory for something being done, but just get the work done. I try to tell folks that I deal with all the time, Martin is gone. And we don't have a modern day Martin. We should all be modern day Martins. We should all pick up the mantle and move it as far as we can individually move it. And don't worry about somebody patting us on the back, on the shoulder, but worry about getting to the finish line. And what is the finish line? The finish line is getting enough of our folks out there to vote so that we can have impact on who's elected, so that now we can have impact on policies, which is what the two of you have been talking about. So that's what we got to, I think, start focusing on a little better. But as I turn into that, the question is, how do we get the ballots turned in? How do we get folks? How do we seal the deal? How do we get these ballots cast and counted? How do we do? How do people vote? How do we get a mail ballot in? How do you plan around these long lines? How do we turn all this work into results?
I think what you got to do is you got to keep the lines being long. You know, we got to keep putting the folk in the line. You know, you can only steal so much, so long. Mm-hmm. And I think they are learning from Wisconsin and a couple of other states that have had elections in the midst of this COVID-19, come to find out that when you do absentee ballots and the like, more folk turn out and vote. And so I think what we have to do, if two of the top basketball or football teams, any of the sport teams was playing, even those who are not for that team would be caught up in the hype. We'd be, I mean, you would stop. I'm from Kentucky, and we get caught up in the Derby. I don't own a horse, don't ride no horse, but during Derby time, we just excited, you know, and you would be just excited during the NFL playoffs, during the NBA playoffs. Ain't got a team, don't play basketball, don't listen to it, but you're gonna have a party at your house, you're gonna hang out. I think we have to make elections about these kind of celebrations. We got to hype it up so much that when you show up at the polls, you feel lost if you wasn't there on that day. If you didn't show up, you didn't drop off your ballot, you ought to feel shamed, ridiculed, or whatever in your neighborhood. And so I think we have to add that to, I mean, I don't like shaming, that is what I'm trying to say. But what I am trying to say is we got to do something so that people feel guilty that you are not covering your own bases. It is not just the elected officials. It's not just the pastors. It's each and every one of us got to do our own. I think we've gotten too privileged because we can walk in, we can drink from any water fountain, we can buy a house. Yes, there are some hindrances to us. Every now and then a camera might catch something. It continues to go on. But if we want to alleviate all of this, if we really believe that Black Lives Matter, let's believe it so much that we go to the polls and vote our conscience, whatever that is, vote our conscience. And if we continue to keep showing up, they'll get it. If you notice during this pandemic, the cities that have most progressive results have been those with African-American women and African-American men that are leading these cities, whether it's Savannah, whether it's Atlanta, whether it's DC or Chicago. These are Black men and women. And you would not have any of this if they, in fact, were not elected. And so as we are making progress, we must continue to open this thing up and let everybody be a part of it. That's how we do this. It's so simple, it sounds complicated. Mm-hmm. You know, I vote by mail. I've been voting by mail in New Jersey for some time. I'm now saying I'm going to the polls. I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna show up and go so they just won't get caught up, you know, and think I'm missing. So me and my friends said we just gonna show up on election day this year. We just gonna show up, drop off something, hang out with the little people. I miss it. Hang out with the little people and get me a lawn chair and sit outside.
All right.
Checking names off. Talking about why you ain't come. Where you at?
But that's what we have to do, right? We have to make it real.
Yeah, we gotta make it real.
We gotta get out there.
Talking about where you at? Pick up the phone and call them. Where you at? Why you ain't here yet?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Technology say you did not vote early. Get on down here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we definitely have to, I agree that we definitely have to make it like a celebration. But one of the key things that we have to do too is while we have this mail-in ballot option because of COVID and while we have elections coming up, we have to say that those barbershops and those beauty shops that are in the district, in the area, those places that people go hang out have to become information centers for voting. Just like the laundromat, that a lot of people go to the laundromat on the corner, that have to become an information system for voting. Sometimes you're going to have to take it where people are and get them that information in order for them to vote. Even with the mail-in ballots, we're going to have notaries, what we call coffee shop notaries. You get what I'm saying? We got people who are willing to sit in a coffee shop. They're doing it right now so that they can notarize your ballot. You can get your ballot notarized while you're buying a cup of coffee. Things like this, your favorite corner store where you get the donuts at. We have notaries right there. So it's like making all of the corner stores, the gas stations, all of these places that are in the dense area, especially urban areas, we making those voter information places, census places. That's what we have to do. And so those are the things, and we have to get those businesses, those small businesses in our community to buy into that narrative. When I come out my house, the place is closest to me, we have to go get them. And so that's my mindset. And that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to go get them and bring them into this process.
Let me go to one of our viewer questions. Regina, you probably remember when we were in school, we had wraparound services in school, and I think I got my first tetanus shot, whatever, in school. I remember the gun. I can't remember what it was, like a gun. They shot you in your arm with it. But anyway, we had dentist services in school. But the one thing is they taught civic engagement in school. They taught you not just history, but what you need to be and how you can play a role. The question that we have is, how are we engaging youth 12 years old and older so that they understand how the issues we are currently fighting for relates to them? How are we relating to these young folks? How should we be relating? We're going to close with that question.
Well, did you want me to start? Or?
Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay, so right now, what we have to do is we're talking about the allocation of resources for schools, and in urban areas, you have these after-school programs, that are not being done, and you have different changes in curriculum that is happening right now. But the thing that I think is most important when we're talking about schools are we have to change the curriculum, and that's another policy change, because when we were growing up, we did have civic engagement, but now you don't see that as much. Teaching people to vote in school, talking about voting in school. Another curriculum thing that need to be changed. When you're talking about engaging, you have to engage people where you have the information and allowing them to participate. Like when we were in school, you had those mock voting booths and things like that you were able to do. You're not seeing that as much because of the states are not allocating resources. They're trying to take over the school system, switch them to charter schools, taking resources from the public schools, diminishing what we can do with the money. So, that's why you have things like that. But one of the biggest policies is when you're talking about history, because you mentioned history, right now, one of the biggest forces that I see is you have American history as an elective in most schools, but then you have American history as a requirement in most schools, but then they make African American history an elective. They're one and the same. So why isn't it a requirement for every child, whether you Black, white, Hispanic, whatever your nationality is? Why aren't you taking that history? Why isn't it that you don't want everybody to know what, the racism that took place in this country, and have them sit through that history and do it from a perspective of a demographic perspective, So
Right.
those are the things that we're talking about. That's why you have to engage in voting, because we need people that are policy changers, that are willing to balance the scales of justice, that are willing to create policy that doesn't discriminate, and willing to erase policy that blocks people out and discriminate against them. When you're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about equitable distribution of resources on an economic level, as well as an educational level, as well as a healthcare level. That's what we're talking about. And so you have people in place that want to do discriminatory policies such as not every individual not having health care, not having dental care, not having educational option to virtual schools right now that's going on through COVID. So if you're talking about engaging those youth, we need to change the people that are in leadership. And that's another reason why people need to vote, because you have people who continues to perpetuate discriminatory public policy, and we got to get rid of it.
All right. All right.
I'm going to say amen.
Amen.
Regina, that's all you saying, Regina.
I'm gonna say amen. But I think one of the, in addition to what Carla said, because she's spot on, is, back in the day too, if something wasn't happening, my grandfather would take us up to the school and start talking about he done paid taxes and that we need a book and why we don't have no homework. And I think we have to become activists in our communities. There was always a teacher in the school that mandated Black history, even if she had to do it at the Baptist church down the street. So I think many of us must become activists also. And that goes back to reach one, teach one. And so I think one narrative in CBTU can start working with faith leaders. There are more retired teachers in our churches than anything. And so we need to begin to work with them on that. And so I think we just have to, because that way schools become what we want them to do. Jesse Jackson used to walk us to school with a list, used to walk parents to schools. And that way, when there was a relationship with the parent and the teacher, the child acted a little better and the teacher knew to be on call. Joe Madison, when he was regional director at NAACP, he used to have a policy that when they graduated from schools in Detroit, they would get a diploma in one hand and a voter registration in another hand. And so we must begin to look at some of those old practices and bring them up. Again, when God told Joshua that Moses had died, he said, be courageous. I already done told Moses what to do. And so you do the same thing. Don't change course. Leadership gets changed.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. We are most definitely run over time this evening, but that's okay. But let me thank Reverend Dr. Regina Thomas for being here with us. I mean, this was just, we had advertised that Sister Julie Green was going to be here with us, and we had a scheduling conflict. So Reverend Dr. Regina Thomas just stepped in at the last minute with her time, and I'm just so appreciative to her for doing that. My sister, State Senator Carla May, the one thing you know about Carla gonna tell it like a TIE is, whether you want to hear it or not. She has checked me on a few occasions when it came to state policy and what folks was or was not doing or should not be doing. So I thank you, Carla, for just being who you are and being with us on this evening. I want a special thank you out to the fearless Stacey Abrams, Governor Honorable Stacey Abrams, and thank her for her participation earlier tonight. I hope all of you out there found this discussion to be engaging and insightful as I did. In 2 weeks, we'll be back with another episode of Labor Shift. As per CBTU practice, the topics and guests will be announced around the 22nd or 23rd hour. So keep your eye out on it. I want to ask all of you to start building an election phone tree. Who will you call on election to tell them you voted? Who will you call to make sure they voted? A simple phone tree can make sure our friends and family are reminded, encouraged, and productive during the upcoming election. Well, that ends our 7th episode of Labor Shift. I thank all of you for joining us this evening. If you can, please visit our website at www.cbtu.org and donate to CBTU so we can continue to raise our voice against injustice and for a progressive shift in power. Good night and God bless you. Hey,
Yes, sir.
it's still showing live on YouTube.
Yeah, that's Fareed, I think. Let me see.